I wanted to ask first, at a high level, what were the steps in writing House Bill 1273 and getting it passed?
Thanks, Conrad. That's a great question. I got to start with, it was a team effort. So you're going to hear from both me and Rep Wicks because everything we do in the House is a team effort. It takes so many people to get bills, big bills like this across the finish line. With 1273, we had a pretty good head start. You did amazing work last session, I think, with our colleagues in the Senate to get a very similar bill passed. Unfortunately, timing wise, with our session, it was a shorter session. It just did not have time to make it through the House. But when we started the progress with, again, a great bill that made it past the Senate, we thought, maybe we can make it a little bit better. So a couple of the differences I think really actually helped. It made it more inclusive. So we made it gender neutral. We made it gender inclusive language. We also expanded what education meant. So not just K through, or not just middle and high schoolers, but we expanded it to community and technical colleges, as well as our four-year universities, both public and private. And we also expanded it down to third grade, third through sixth graders who maybe don't have the actual dispensers in their bathrooms, but will have access to them in the health rooms. And then of course, the amazing amendment that we added to make it trans inclusive, so that you're gonna find them in even more bathrooms than just female designated, gender neutral, but you'll also have access to them in men's facilities if there is no gender neutral bathroom available. So it got bigger and better, and actually it was easier to push across the finish line as a result.
I'll just totally agree with April or Representative Berg on that. We can't pass legislation, I think, without the hard work of the different groups and the different entities that are coming in to support it. Because we can, we're on the floor, we're in committee meetings, but we need people reaching out to advocates and people that are supportive. And I think that's what made it happen. I love the effort that we put in the House to get together and to have these discussions on expanding the language. And I think that inclusivity was critical. I also think, it was really important that we added, we created a bipartisan bill too, and that Representative Berg worked with the right folks and got some great people on there to help champion that as well, because you need people in every room talking about the legislation and talking about its importance. So the fact that we got Representative Caldeer on there was critical and huge. And I'm just sad that I wasn't the third name on that list. Other people beat me to it, but we had a lot of support, and this bill makes a ton of sense. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to be difficult to get it through, and that timing doesn't matter. You really have to be working critically on every layer and making sure you're pushing things through. So I really can't thank the advocates, the Red Sea, WA Menstrual Equity for all their hard work to do that. That's really what it takes. And as I've learned in my first year, with doing it on our own, it's just not a thing.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, I'm glad all the coalition was able to partner and help you get it passed. I'm curious, since both of you mentioned both that it's a gender inclusive bill with trans inclusive language and a bipartisan bill, I'm wondering how you got both of those things to take place as you worked on the bill in the House.
That's a great question. So, first off, I think it really helps, and this is going to sound really odd, but when you come to Olympia and you go into the bathrooms, these products are free and available in our bathrooms in Olympia at the Capitol, right? For us and for our aides and things like that. So our women on both sides of the aisle knew that that's pretty helpful. That's pretty cool. And as Senator Rivers mentioned while she was, and she's a Republican senator who was helping us get it through on the Senate side, in her speech on the floor, she said, look, these aren't the Cadillac of products. These are necessary, kind of like the toilet paper in the bathroom we have. So it really, that it worked itself across the aisle. It really is important. I think women know that. And as far as our kind of male colleagues, I think it was really it was really good to have the students. So we had, amazing equity partners and stakeholders like yourselves, but we also had a lot of young people. And I have to give a big shout out to our TVW Capital in the Classroom class that had actually been working on this for quite a few years. And they take a bill or a project and try and get it across the finish line. They work with a professional lobbyist, they learn about the process. And those young people came and testified in a way that really broke down a lot of partisan lines, partisan thoughts about menstruation, equity, and period poverty. So without their help and their stories, I don't know that we could have gotten the bipartisan support we had for all of those, the inclusive language, gender neutral bathrooms, men's facilities, and just really expanding it, because it's, quite frankly, it got to be a much bigger lift as we expanded it to not just public, but also private institutions.
Yeah, I'll echo that as well. I mean, when, more than half the population menstruates, they get it. They understand how important it is to have these products. And we know, I mean, I think there's not one individual that menstruates that hasn't, experienced that, oh my goodness, I'm leaking. They now have commercials, I would say, about this all the time, and kind of, oh, the gush, and I thought that was so funny. And I thought about this group when I heard that, but really just being honest about, that stigma that you feel, that nervousness. I mean, anyone can tell you a story about menstruating and the menses and, wanting to, not be at school because you don't feel good. And it's also just more inconvenient, and you have to sit in, a product all day. And so that, I would just say that, we get it. And the more people that a legislation impacts and they understand how to talk about it, the more you're going to get people on board. So it's just like what Rep Berg said. It really gets itself over the finish line. It's just a matter of, being present when the hearing happens and having that language and continuing to discuss and hammer home this experience and this lived experience that all of us have had. So that was critical. I just add on to that.
Thanks so much. I'm glad that all the student testimony was really effective in helping the bill move forward. Now that the bill has been signed into law, could you give us some perspective on how you'll be measuring the success of its implementation? Obviously, menstrual products will now be required to be in school bathrooms. So that's a very tangible measurement of simply the products being in bathrooms. And I wonder if there's other ways or other impacts you think the bill will have on students as it's implemented.
Well, I can go first this time, I guess. I think that's one thing I learned early on when I was appointed to this position, that, you can pass laws all day, and well, not all day, but it's during a certain time here in Washington, but you really have to follow things through, and I think Rep. Lauren Davis and actually Representative Eslick talked to me about that they really wanted to make sure that people were aware of the legislation and that it was having the intended effect. And so, I know that, Rep. Berg, with also being on the Everett School Board, will definitely be visiting schools and making sure that she's seeing products. And I'll be also interested to see how they implement it too, because, I think, as I recall, the fiscal note was a little bit high because there was this, assessment that, that pads and tampons had to be provided in a certain way, right? And through a metal box. And that's not necessarily how it works, in a nice, any restaurant really, and you go to the bathroom and, if they're thoughtful about that, they're putting it in a nice little basket. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It just has to be provided. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens. And I know I'll be asking questions whenever I'm going to the Marysville School District, which I spend a lot of time in, visiting the restroom and seeing what they have and making sure that it's accessible and available and asking questions if it's not. And so that'll be a really important thing for me. Even today I started thinking about, moving beyond this, and also our jails and for incarcerated individuals, making the phone call. That's what we did. Do you provide, these products for free, or do they have to purchase them at the commissary? Just looking at the next step. So constantly asking those questions and knowing what to look for is really important. But I'd love to hear if Rep. Berg has other ideas as well.
Yeah, no, I think that you keyed on so many good things because I think there is that, we get so happy when we pass a bill like this, right? So partners, stakeholders, student groups, everybody's like, yay, raw team. But the question becomes the implementation. And so one thing I tell every group is, please let us know if you are in a space, an educational space that is not doing what they should do. But the other piece of it is that we do have Title I schools that really are bare to the bone, that can barely provide toilet paper for some of their kiddos. And so I'm so excited. Today I was doing a webinar for the for Kotex U. They've got a great nonprofit called the Alliance for Period Supplies. And so they'll be doing drives across the country for period supplies to alleviate period poverty. And that's something that I really want to make sure schools know about, that there are foundations like theirs. Costco has a great buying program. There's a lot of great resources out there. So this mandate that does seem a bit unfunded, much like the mandate to provide toilet paper in bathrooms, we can help you get there. We can connect you with resources and partners. And of course, being out in the community, I'm excited about holding, a back to school drive for period products as well, because it's necessary. And I think the other thing that Rep Wicks really keyed in on is that next step, right? And so looking at our prison population, making sure that our kiddos, even in the summertime, so when they're not in traditional school settings, making sure they have access to these products, potentially with the summer meals that they pick up. So we're looking at some really cool, innovative ways to continue the work.
That's wonderful. And I want to give a shout out to all the folks at the Red Sea who participated in the Ridwell Drive, as our group was able to donate period products across the state to
Nice.
communities in need. I wanted to turn the table on the discussion to look toward the future, since this panel is mostly focused on the future of menstrual equity here in Washington State. Could both of you, starting with Rep Wicks, give some background on what you think is next in the menstrual equity policy space at the state level, and what your priorities will be next session?
Yes, I'm just super proud of Washington State, first of all, for being one of the few states. I think 60% don't continue to have a tampon and pad tax. And we were able to get rid of that thanks to your work as well. And I'm not sure, I didn't find data on how many folks are moving toward providing the free products. But I'd love to make sure that we mandate free products beyond just our schools and our learning environments as well. So I think that'll be a huge piece of it too, making sure that those are available. I think the good businesses are doing that already, and so it makes sense. But one thing that I think we need to think about bathroom equity as well. I think, and I'll kind of steal a little statistic. I don't have the statistics exactly, so I hope that Rep Berg has it, but there are very few, and my alma mater, Washington State University, has very few women's bathrooms. And so one thing that I've been thinking about for several years is, how do we create just gender neutral bathrooms so that people aren't waiting in line? It's, potty parity. And so to me, that's going to be even bigger. And with the fact that we continue to kind of have difficulty getting the tampons and pads in boys' bathrooms, and we were able to do that, but only if they don't have a gender neutral bathroom. That shows that we need to do more around our bathrooms, and making sure that women or those that are not sure where to go are not waiting in line and are concerned. I mean, we can all attest again to that waiting, that in line, when you can see the men's restroom, wanting to go and use the men's restroom. At my own wedding, there was doors that said sitters and or squatters and sitters, or sitters, I don't know. It was just really, and I made new signs for the doors, because I said, use whatever bathroom you want. They're exactly the same. And so I love what, Starbucks has done in downtown Seattle. And I think that we need to make that for new construction in a new building, just have bathrooms, shared sinks. I think that's a safety issue for our transgender friends. And I think that's a safety issue for dads with girls, female identifying girls, and the same with moms with boys that identify as male. And so having that will be really important. And I know that's going to be a really big lift, but I have been thinking about it for probably 10 years, and I'm now in a position to be able to do that. So I hope I can get help with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much. I love the fact that we're looking at menstruation equity as an iterative process, right? So this is not the bill got over the finish line, but this is not the finish line when we're talking about period poverty and ending it. So you have the pink tax that's gone. We've got free supplies now for our students, our menstruating students. But honestly, the next step has to be looking at not just our prison population, but also how can we more creatively alleviate period poverty? A new study just came out, like literally hot off the presses this week as a part of Menstruation Equity Week, that talks about COVID, and this won't be a surprise to anyone, that the problem has been exacerbated, right? So we used to have about or about 25% of folks who were experiencing period poverty. That number has gone up, and it's gone up dramatically because of COVID. So I think we do need to kind of dust off some of the playbook that we had to get us to even 25% to see now how do we make products available in more public places. And to Rep. Wicks's point, we do need to talk about gender parity in bathrooms, and honestly, just gender neutral bathrooms. Most of the new construction I'm seeing in Seattle, really, it's less expensive, it's safer for their clientele, and it just makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. But I think as far as groups like the Red Sea and the Menstrual Equity Project, I think collective, I think you really need to focus in on folks where they are. And so when I say that, prisons, so that's one huge piece of it. Nationwide, we've got issues there. But also when I'm looking at my kiddos that we're feeding those free and reduced lunch to really anyone during the summertime, and so they're not also getting menstruation products. So how do we do that? And talking with the folks, some of our different allies around the free space of period products, that's a great place to start with reusable period products, right? So when you're picking up your free and reduced lunch, and most times they're kits, so you're not necessarily going every day, but could you also be picking up a reusable menstruation product? And so having those creative conversations are going to get us to the specific next steps in menstrual equity. But I'm so excited for the future, specifically because of groups like yours.
That's wonderful. And as someone who lives in Seattle myself, I see a lot of those things taking place in our city. And I think one of the great things about the menstrual equity bills we've been working on is that they're truly coalitions across the state. So I look forward to involving both of you and our coalition partners across the state and making sure that everyone's voices are included in those efforts. For our next question, I wanted to ask a little bit about partnership. You both mentioned several issues on which you're looking to partner with grassroots activists. I'm wondering what students and activists can do to create greater menstrual equity in our state moving forward, and what specifically you would want from activists as you pursue these various initiatives next session.
Do you want me to jump in?
Sure. I'm
Okay.
thinking too.
I know, right? Because our brains go, it's like when you tell us that you've got activists waiting to help us with our next project. So for me, the biggest thing will be the two spaces. One, our prison space, and then two, our open public spaces. Because again, if I'm in a park, I know there's going to be toilet paper. Now, I say that because we all have been to park bathrooms that don't have toilet paper, but I know that there's an expectation for sanitation needs that will be stocked. And so I think that's the next step for a lot of reasons. Some of it is period poverty, but some of it's accessibility. Same with our prisons. When you think about it, it's not just having it there, and to Rep. Wicks's point, having it available in the dispensaries, but they should be free, and we've got to make sure that they're accessible. And as I talk with different people in those spaces, depending if you're in a prison versus a jail, you've got a lot of nuances about accessibility. And so as legislators, that's where we're looking for activists like you to help us by A, asking the questions, and then B, helping us really get what we call bake that legislation to a point where it's refined, right, by community partners, by input. And so for me, those are the next steps. And then of course, if whatever we can do to get more gender neutral bathrooms in our educational spaces, that is truly the new frontier. And that's where we're going to need a lot of community help, but I know it can be done.
Now I'll just add on to that, really great points and exactly what we need. I'm a communications major and kind of bring that to the legislature. I think like a lot of people that were elected this year, we did really well on the floor. And so I love when people send me, things to talk about and help not just bake the legislation, but also bake those talking points too. And so that we continue to repeat that message. And that's the most important thing. We know that, women have to be asked to run for office 7 times to do it. We know that you have to hear something 7 times to really retain it. And so really hitting home those messages and being that, support system on the outside. And, I came across when I was reviewing all of the amazing Instagram posts that I missed. I always loved seeing the Instagram posts from the Red Sea. I went into the blog and this, period poverty, menstrual equity, these are really intersectional issues, right? And I love the blog post by Emma Cooper Smith, who's actually with the Sunrise Movement. And she talked about, just that menstruation and climate justice is really at the end. She talks about it being life-giving. I love that she made that important tie, because we deserve to have products too that are toxic free and that are also going to go into, or not going to harm our environment even more and add to the waste. And so there's so many other ways to do this. And I love that she came into this specific area with that, that other kind of lens as well, and recognizing those things. So I think, really expanding this, we always talk about intersectionality, but how important this is for other things. So we can bring in other people that care about climate justice, that care about homelessness, that care about multiple other things, education, it really touches on everything. And so we have an opportunity to bring together not just groups that are specifically focused on this, but folks that care about a multitude of other things or are really passionate about one thing in particular. It really will tie in. So I think being able to broaden our group is going to be great, but continue the information. And I love that, asking questions too. It's when people come to me, especially right now, that are asking questions about why is this the law? And it gives me the opportunity to go and find the information out and to gather more. Like today, I had a meeting to learn more from a judge in our local area about foster care and parental rights for LGBTQ families, and learned so much. And now I have even more homework, which I love. But just kind of going to keep following that. But them just asking the questions allowed me to do that and gave me that opportunity. So thanks for that question.
Of course. I'll throw this next question to you first, Rep. Wicks, because I think what your most recent comment really rolled into that really nicely. I'm curious if you give the audience some background on how useful it is to put pressure on elected officials like yourselves to pass menstrual equity initiatives. And if you could also give us some background on which types of lobbying practices work best, whether that be calling, tweeting, emailing, all sorts of tools we have in the toolbox, especially in this virtual world. Hopefully next session isn't quite as virtual, but regardless, I'm sure we'll be using a lot of the same tools. I'm interested in what you think are the most effective tools to persuade folks like yourselves to take action.
Definitely. I probably had a different opinion coming in and then maybe a little bit different afterward, after my first session to know what really works. I do, I'll say, first of all, the pressure question. Yes, it's good to put pressure, but be really cautious about the kind of pressure you're putting on folks, because, especially in the House, it's a big group of people, and we're working with a lot of different personalities, a lot of different experience levels, a lot of different people coming in. And I'll use one, and I won't name who it is, but they have sent to all legislators about a bill that they didn't get passed this year. That had a lot of support. The legislation had a ton of support, but they continue to rail on some legislators for it not getting through. And so, at some point, another one of our colleagues, I think in the Senate, had emailed back and just said, this isn't helping your cause. And so I think, really working with people and finding out what they care about, again, based on what you said, the intersectionality around that and tying it back to that, and definitely, calling, emailing. I think that is all really important, having people reach out, because a lot of legislators, although, even if it's the same email, as long as it's from one of my constituents, that's really important. Then I'll know. And, when it gets down to the wire, if you're getting a lot of emails or a lot of communications about something in particular, you're going to say, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to vote yes, or I'm going to vote no. You might not always get back to everybody right away, but that really resonates with me. If a constituent is telling me they care about something, that really guides my decision making. So I say, yes, send emails. My LA Mary Fosse's on the call right now too. And I know she'll get a lot, but I think it's really important to be specific again, if, as much as you possibly can. I know it does cost money to do this, but to really, identify your specific legislators to reach out to. You can blow up our systems. I think Tim Eyman has done that a few times, and no LA likes him, just because of the massive amounts of emails that come from people that are not even my constituents. So that's really important. And I'm sorry I went on a little bit for a while on that, but there's nothing wrong with calling and getting the word out and reaching out multiple times and at multiple different points during the bill's cycle.
Yeah, and I would just echo everything that Rep Wicks said. I think the biggest key, my takeaway from this session is, one, not making assumptions about how you think a legislator is going to vote, because all of my bills, you'll notice, were bipartisan, including this one. And so I did have some groups who were putting pressure on legislators, not so much from 1273, but a couple other ones, making the assumption they didn't support it, only to find out later they were actually part of the co-sponsoring list. So really making sure, and actually one legislator got so annoyed that they voted against the bill when it got to the floor, because this group had really but it was all based on an assumption. So I think that's huge to understand that that we're all individuals. It's a team sport, but we all have our individual stories that really does impact how we vote and what we think about things. The other piece of it too, even though it was a virtual session and really difficult, there's a lot of good testimony, but I will say we read all of the testimony that came in through our email source. And then we also looked at the numbers. So we looked to see how many people signed in pro and con. So even if it's not a bill that you're championing, it's great to sign in on other allies and advocates' bills. And people do take notice of that. They think it's kind of, again, it's a team sport in your space too, because to Rep Wicks's point, things are very intersectional. So supporting bills that aren't necessarily ones that you founded. And then the other piece of it too is really making those connections. The constituent piece cannot be overemphasized, because we do get a lot of emails, and any email that starts in the subject line with "from your constituent," right? And then, colon 1273, that's going to always go to the top of the box. So being strategic about how you're communicating about the bills you want us to know about always works best if you have a constituent in our district making that communication. But without that, I would say you still make the appointments, do the lobby days, I think the social media game for all of the partners on this call is just fire. So I think anything that you're going to do, make sure you back it up with that social media game, because for all of us legislators, we do at some point ping through there to see, what people are talking about, what's the word on the street. And to, you guys know this better than us, the word on the street is not on Facebook. So your IG and your Twitter game is everything. And quite frankly, after this next cycle, I think TikTok is going to be another space that folks are going to want to see, be checking to see what constituents and what allies want to see done in the legislature.
That's great. Thanks for the tips on the best channels to reach you. And I also kind of chuckled as both of you were talking about receiving emails from people who aren't your constituents, because I receive so many, advocacy asks that would email, the chairs of all these committees who don't actually represent me. And I'm like, no, this is a waste of my time and their time. I think it's important to know your audience and make sure you're a constituent if you're reaching out, because that's the most effective.
Yeah. And I'll quickly add though too, I did like seeing things about my committee as well. So if it was children, youth and families, or transportation, or commerce and gaming, that was important to me to hear from specific groups too. So they didn't necessarily have to be from my constituents there, but it does definitely resonate. So don't be too worried about that as well. It can really help when when you don't have a lot of time to do that. And just to Rep Berg's point too, yes. I mean, I mostly as a vice chair, I read off my, I would go through all of the testifiers, and that was, I would even share how many people signed in favor or how many people signed in against on a bill. So we do look at that, and it's very helpful.
Great. Thanks for that clarification. I wanted to ask one last question based on your responses before I throw it to audience questions. You both talked about how the two main issues you're going to be looking to next session, having menstrual products in prisons and creating gender neutral bathroom spaces across the state. Could you talk about how those two issues intersect and how you see those issues moving forward next session? Rep Wicks, we can start with you.
Great. Sorry. I feel like we've touched on it a little bit. I think, again, these pieces of legislation are intersectional. And I loved that what Rep Berg said too, is that, with construction, it's cheaper to do that. And I think it's also cheaper to provide people with these products up front because, this not having access to these products does create a lot of health equities, which does end up creating a lot of health costs. And so this is, really about the health of people and safety. And so both of these bills, hopefully when they move forward as legislation with a bill number, are going to be addressing those things. They're going to be increasing our improving our health, building on our quality of life, and helping reduce these long-term costs that I think come from not taking care of our people. And so we're constantly doing that. We're thinking about how we're helping others and how we're getting in front of it. We're being really upstream. I think, pun intended, if there's part of that. But really, again, it's intersectionality. They all work together to create a really strong space for the people that reside in our state and in our nation. And so as we're doing that, we'll see that health grow and improve, and that ends up reducing costs in the long time. So it's really an economic argument at the same time.
And I would echo everything Rep Wicks said. I think for me, the intersectionality of both of those things really comes down to basic human rights. I was proud to be on the first school board in the state that had a trans inclusive bathroom policy, the Edmond School District, and voting that in, it didn't feel as historic as it was. It felt like this is a basic human right. And that's where, I hedge my bets with the conversations around menstruation in prisons, because, you want to find out that something, isn't being done, should be done, and maybe is being done in a way that you can help bolster it or make it better, right? And even in this project, we heard from a lot of schools that said, oh, no, we already provide them for free. And I said, awesome, but we need to make sure it's codified so that everybody, it can't just be the one-off good because that's what we should do. But yeah, that intersection of humanity, that's not only going to drive the moving forward on these two legislative priorities, it's going to drive really all of our work. Our budget and our time, those are both reflective of our values. And to Rep Wick's point, it's a good value to provide these products free to folks who are currently incarcerated, because it helps with overall health and hygiene, mental health, social, emotional, the list goes on. But at the end of the day, what matters most is people's humanity. And so anytime someone asks me, what's your next step in a certain issue or platform or space, it always is going to true north back to basic human rights so that everyone is included in everything we do.
That was beautiful. Thank you. On that inspiring note, we can move it to audience questions. We have time for about 2 to 3 questions. So if you have a question for Rep Berg or Rep Wicks, feel free to unmute yourself and ask it now.
I have a couple of questions, but I'll try to just maybe do one and see if anyone else has questions. Something that we heard yesterday, we held a community visioning session with Emerald youth organizers, and one of our speakers actually brought up budget provisos, potentially for schools or districts that would need funding for period products and hygiene products. And so I've never really heard of budget provisos. So if you could speak to that and how that could potentially be something for the next session.
Sure, I can pop in. I'm sure Rep Berg has something to add as well. Yes, there's a lot of different ways to lead, and one of them is not just with legislation, but with budget provisos that we learned this year. I think a lot, and one thing that I worked on was trying to provide hearing aid coverage for children, and we were struggling to get that legislation through because there was a fiscal note to it, and in a year like this year especially, we were being really cautious about that spending, and we also couldn't get an accurate number on that fiscal note. And so just because, part of it was reaching out to insurance companies to see what that coverage would look like, because it's not covered by the ACA. So we were able to get a small budget proviso, we call it budget dust, of $75,000 in that, to have the Office of the Insurance Commissioner do a study that will be due in December on what that cost would actually look like. So we can actually get accurate numbers that don't just come in that really quick fiscal note process that has to have really quick turnaround. We also did one for the first clinic here in at Providence, which helps keep families together by helping mothers who give birth at a hospital that might come into contact with CPS or are at risk of losing their children, with support, legal support and co-parents or parent advocate support, as well as social worker support. So really, trying to think upstream again on that as well. So there's a lot of opportunities here. And I think especially on school districts and locations that are struggling, but can kind of come up with some innovative ideas, I think there's opportunities for grants and ways we can get that in there. So it's a great option that, to move forward on. So I think I'd love to think about that with you too, and help walk through the process that I learned about this year.
Yeah, and I think Rep Wicks really laid it out well. That's a great way, especially if you've got a policy bill that has a fiscal note. And at the end of the day, really what matters most is that fiscal piece. The proviso process is a good way to get it across the finish line. What I will though say, the one caveat, especially as we're talking about 1273 and some of the schools that might raise their hand and say they've got issues, unless they're going to come to me with a budget proviso for toilet paper, I really want people to think differently about menstruation. And I think that the proviso process would be great for something like piloting a menstrual equity project in a prison or jail in a rural county. And what that does is a couple things. It gets us some real good data, like Rep was saying, what does this cost? What does this mean? But it also lets folks know that the sky isn't going to fall. Right? That look, we did this and the sky didn't fall, lo and behold. And so one of the provisos I did this year was to expand early ECAP, right? So that kind of birth to 3 ECAP, and there had already been a pilot program. The sky didn't fall, so let's add a couple more spaces. Let's see what happens, right? So that's really process-wise, that's what we're doing. But I think it's a really powerful process for community activists like yourselves to think about, because it doesn't have to be restrictive to some policy that we've already passed. So let's say you're looking at a community, maybe a public facility, maybe a prison, maybe somewhere I haven't even thought of, and you're thinking, oh, this would be a place where we should provide products. Another one that I've heard of, and just spitballing here, throwing stuff at the wall, is reusable products. I got a lot of feedback from people saying, can't you include reusable products in 1273 as an option? And the answer, frankly, was no. Some of it fiscal, but again, it's I take it back to that basic human need, not the Cadillac of products, making it accessible. And so that's not a space for reusable products, but there is a place for reusable products, and potentially doing some type of proviso pilot program. Again, back to thinking about my summer meals, that's when organizers like yourself could say, look, let's do a proviso to have these provided with every summer meal for big districts, small districts, medium districts, and see what happens. And I'll bet you dollars to donuts, the sky won't fall. So, but it's a great question.
I don't know if there's another question coming, but I did want to plug also, because Rep Berg and I'll call her April in this instance, work really hard locally in Snohomish County to get women elected. And this year being an odd year is going to be really critical for, getting our school board directors and our city councilors and our county councilors in office, and making sure it's people that care about these issues. And so I'll just put a plug in there that, getting the, right people in office that that can have that lived experience and that and can champion those things are going to be critical. I probably shouldn't talk about that if we're talking legislation, but that's really a big passion for us, and just want to plug that.
You can talk about it. It's
okay,
encouraged.
Oh, where would I send them? To the National Women's Political Caucus of Washington is where I would send them, to Colleen. So I'll put my personal email in the chat, but the Women's Political Caucus has lots of training and resources, and we do one specifically for women of color as well, because we know that we need more women of color in office. And so we create a safe space for them to ask any questions and share their own experience. So yeah, and we also have recordings, and yeah, we'll send it on.
I think the importance of voting and participating in odd-year elections cannot be understated. So I'm very pleased you brought it up. We have time for one last question. If there are any other questions from our audience members on the Zoom call, otherwise we can move to concluding remarks.
I do have one more. I'm just curious because this session was mostly entirely remote, and I'm just wondering, what are the takeaways of the remote session, and what, if you know of anything that's going to stay remote, particularly the virtual committees or the signing of something. But yeah, I'm just kind of curious what's going to stay remote and what's not going to.
So I'll jump in first. So we are definitely going to be 100% back in session come January. So we'll be face to face. That said, of course, you know, public health wise and how far we will be able to go to open things up to the community for live testimony, et cetera, that's all going to be TBD. One thing I know that will stay is the ability to remote testify. I think that folks are working really hard behind the scenes because we do not want to cut off access. I can tell you as a legislator, being in my community, even though we live relatively close to Olympia, it's great to know that community members can testify and have input and not have to drive that hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, to just give that literally 2 minutes of testimony. So remote testimony, I think, will be one thing that you see as a holdover. I don't think you're going to see remote committees themselves, that will still be, again, all back there. But one thing to think about too, this summer, not so much, but a lot of summers, the interim, we do listening tours for a lot of our committees. So especially ones like education, finance. So be on the lookout for those, even if it's a committee where you think, well, what do I have, you know, what does that have to do with the advocacy work I'm working on? The reason why those are powerful is when we do these listening tours, we're literally listening. And so if you've got a policy initiative or advocacy work in a certain area that'll fall within that committee, for instance, education, so talking about menstrual equity in our schools would have been one for the last session's listening tour. That's where you can kind of float it, and you'll have committee members, other reps, staff go, interesting, there might be something there. So really be on the lookout for that. But that was a great question.
Yeah, great question. I do hope some interim committees might have that opportunity to join remotely. And I just, you know, in case there's so much going on in your local community that you want to attend. But I also am looking forward to being in the communities that we're working with and as well. But remote testimony, critical. We've been talking about that for years. And I actually put a bill forward this year as part of the Open Public Meetings Act to make sure that as long as an entity, even a sewer district, had the dollars and the employees to do it, that they're getting remote testimony even when we move into in-person meetings again. And that's going to be, you know, just huge. It's been huge for me to be able to attend Marysville City Council meetings and Everett City Council meetings and school board meetings and know what's going on, and without, you know, having to travel to each location, but to really be able to understand the needs of my different the communities that I serve here in the 38th. And, you know, I can't even imagine, I don't have children. And so, you know, the pressures, the work, the transportation that's involved, and that ADA accessibility is huge. And then one thing I'll also add is I think this year we had some really specific requirements for the bills that we pushed forward because we were worried about time and what we could get done. And I think really having a driving, especially for the Democratic caucus, a guide about what we were going to work on and really sticking to that. One of them, being environmental justice. Does it cost money? Does it address the COVID crisis? Does it invest? Is it an economic boost and help us recover? And does it address equity? Those were really important drivers, and I think allowed us to get a lot of good things done. So I do hope that, we kind of have a theme for each year, and that's really expressed early on. And so we can get, have these really consequential legislative sessions like we did this year, even with such, I think, barriers. Or just, new experiences. So I hope some of the things stay. I do enjoy that, with some of my organizations, we can do remote events that invite the rest of the state to come. So I think we have to think about what's going to be best for people and as accessible as possible. And that's going to be a good change.
Awesome. Well, we're just about out of time. I wanted to open it up to concluding remarks, starting with Rep. Berg. If you have any last words for our audience, and then we can go about our evening.
Well, thank you, Conrad. And thank you just everyone. I cannot tell you the just how much your support helped. And just to keep it quick and brief, earlier today, I was doing a training for it wasn't just COTEX, it was also the National Foundation for Legislative Women, or Women in the Legislature. And so women from across the country who are in their state house or their state senate got to listen to 1273 stories from both myself as well as some of the student advocates about how to do it in their state. And I've had women reach out to me to say, hey, we're thinking about it here. We tried it. How did this work? How did you work with students? How did you work with male allies? How did you get that trans inclusive amendment done? And how did you do the gender inclusive language? So the work you did doesn't just affect the students in this state, it's going to affect students across our country. And so I cannot thank you enough.
I'll just add to that, the work that you put into this year was amazing. And again, we were able to accomplish so much because of the team and the advocates and everything you do. I'm so impressed with your ability to not only advocate, but just be present on social media and meeting people where they are, wherever they are, and whatever helps, wherever that space that resonates with them. And I just to echo what Rep. Berg said, having your support here in Washington, helping us lead the way here is helping lead the way everywhere else. And you see when Washington State or California or other states do things, the rest of the country follows along. And so that's really critical and just has amazing waves across our nation and the entire world. So thank you.
And thanks to both of you for listening to allies like us and getting the job done. Before we depart, I wanted to plug our next event tomorrow evening at 5:30 Pacific. We have a panel of doctors talking about knowing your menstruating body. So if you are interested, please check out the Eventbrite page for that event and register. Otherwise, I think we can wrap it up for the evening. And thanks so much to our panelists and for the audience for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much.